Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and ITY TV interview. I'm joined today by Andrew Slavkovic. He is the Solutions Engineering Manager for Australia and New Zealand at CyberArk. Welcome to the program.
Hey Alex, great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, could you please tell us about CyberArk and the focus of the company as we are now in 2021, away from 2020 and all of COVID, and hopefully for the beginning of a much brighter future for us all?
Yeah, let's hope so. So CyberArk, we're an information security company
Mm-hmm.
really focused on securing digital identities. Now, we pioneered the privileged access management space some 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think in 2021, our focus really remains the same on securing those digital identities as organizations embark on digital transformation, but also educating the market on the power of identity as a security control.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you hear about all sorts of things like passwordless and, there's lots of movement in this space. But look, before we get on to any of that sort of stuff, can you please tell us a little bit about your history in the world of tech?
Yeah, sure. So I was fortunate enough to really grow up with technology in early schooling life. Computing was being brought in as a mandatory subject.
Yeah.
So had a lot of fun trying to circumnavigate security controls on the computer systems to play games or just cause general mayhem. And I think that's what led me to a career in cyber, just that curiosity. And now in the last 15 years, I've done a variety of roles in cyber. In the last 5 years here with CyberArk.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I also had a similar technological upbringing, but instead of going into the security and cyber path, I went into helping people fix their computer problems and technology journalism, where I tell people about it. But I could easily see myself having done something similar to you. But probably, I mean, when I first got my computer was 1979. Security and passwords didn't really exist. I think you're slightly younger than me, so there was more of a focus on it at the time. And I mean, we also those movies like War Games, but yeah. Anyway, so look, so we're in 2021. What are the cybersecurity trends you're seeing that will play out this year, especially given everything and all the hack attacks and cyber security threats that happened in 2020?
Yeah, look, I think it's still early days in 2021, obviously, but I think just a continuation of some of those themes we saw last year. So digital transformation, I know it's becoming a bit of a buzzword, but that's going to continue this year. We're going to have to support the remote workforce.
Mm-hmm.
We see organizations probably still be more palatable to consume things as a service. And also, hopefully, the maturing of stuff like AI technology, which will be getting better at predicting and taking action on suspicious or malicious security events.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you do hear about companies where, I mean, years ago, the security companies, Norton and Kaspersky and, even companies like Acronis today, they talk about having their systems that can proactively, find zero-day threats and ransomware on, individuals' personal computers. So it would just make sense that AI can do this at an enterprise scale. And, and given that, it's sort of surprising that the most recent high-profile cyber attack that made global headlines in December was SolarWinds, the SolarWinds breach, which I've read articles saying how come the US spy agencies didn't sort of see that one coming. But forgetting about the US for a second, what impact has this had on Australian organisations, which is the part of the world that we're based in?
Yeah, I think I would make a good byline for a movie,
Yeah.
the whole breach. It definitely was attention grabbing. And if you look at the analysis, like you mentioned, it was really sophisticated on scope and scale, and it was almost executed to perfection.
Yeah.
They were able to compromise the internal development network for SolarWinds and actually inject that malicious code into the product. And to me, it really does highlight something we talk about a lot about examining those third-party relationships, because they are essentially an extension of your security perimeter as well. So we like to say it reiterates a message that, hey, no one's immune to this kind of thing.
So what's the best mitigation for this type of attack?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is there is no one thing.
Yeah.
I think if you analyze the attack chain on that attack, you see multiple stages where the attack could have been prevented.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we really talk about this concept of a defense in depth strategy. So if one security control fails, the other one, in theory, should seamlessly pick it up and address it. So that's why also security is really a team game. We can't rely on one vendor or one control to say that we're safe.
Now, one of the things that we've seen a lot happen in 2020 was this acceleration towards the cloud. People adopting cloud, people migrating between clouds. And so, with this rapid adoption over this last year, thanks to COVID-19 really accelerating it all, why is it so important to protect cloud identities in hybrid work environments?
Yeah, so COVID, like you said, has caused this massive digital transformation effort. And we're seeing organizations run hybrid workloads either deliberately as a strategy or because they're in the middle of this awkward transformation situation. And think about this for a second. You've got your staff managing multiple sets of infrastructure at the same time with different understanding and skill sets required. It really is a really hard job to do. And in these environments, there's just an explosion of identities. And I think it's the perfect storm for an attacker to go in there right now and act like a legitimate user with all this mayhem going on and do whatever it is they want and go about unimpeded. And that's why I think it's so important that we protect these digital identities.
Well, that comes down to the concept of least privilege and zero trust. And, they've become a lot more important. You hear a lot about this, but for those who are sort of wondering, what exactly does it mean?
Yeah, so at the simplest form, zero trust is a new security paradigm designed specifically to address the modern enterprise. And it's centered around the belief that essentially we should trust no one. So even if that's inside or outside the network. And least privilege, I like to think of it as a control that's used to achieve zero trust principles. And it's all about giving you the least amount of privilege required to still be successful at your job. From an attacker's perspective, they're both important because you limit the amount of lateral movement that it can occur if you do become compromised. And you're also shrinking the attack pattern or surface that attacker can do when they infiltrate your network. And in general, it just makes the attacker's job harder.
So I guess it seems obvious in one sense because of all the chaos with COVID, but why haven't organizations made this a priority until now? And why is the problem so hard to tackle?
So zero trust as a security model or principle has only been around since around 2010. So from that regard, it's quite new. And I think compliance frameworks really haven't caught up. We've seen something like NIST release advice and guidance last year around how organizations can implement the intent of it. And also it's really hard to retrospectively go back if you're not going through a digital transformation and fit a new security model or concept on old infrastructure. So we see digital transformation, perfect time to reinvigorate your environment and tackle a zero trust mindset now. The second part of that question you asked me is why is the problem so difficult? And I think it's organizations are just overwhelmed. I speak to all my friends in organizations now, and they're having to not only do these digital transformations themselves, but keep the lights on as well. So it causes an internal a stress between these competing priorities.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking also that given that people still aren't really going back to work, I mean, there's probably some extra leeway there for some of the IT teams to do some more work, I don't know, over weekends or whenever it might be, to try and take advantage of some of the downtime, even though people are still having to work from home and work, to try and accelerate this just like everything else was accelerated in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see tremendous amount of work being done in organizations. If you considered this years ago, you wouldn't think that we would get to the point that we've gotten to today so quickly. So it's quite impressive.
So with too many permissions, from all of these various cloud access and, like even the old sneaker net, the shadow cloud things that people have done to try and get around whatever restrictions or just to try and make things work as smoothly as they can. How do organizations take back control of cloud security and implement the least privileged environment that you've been telling us about?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think the key starting point is visibility. You don't know what you don't know. And organizations that we talk to, they could not accurately articulate where the permissions exist and what a user can do with those permissions. So the way I look at it, the first step is you need to really identify where those risky permissions exist. You need to be able to rank from kind of a risk perspective on what does that mean to the organization. And then we need to create some kind of least privileged risk policy to be able to apply this policy across the cloud environment as well.
Yeah, and look, obviously having a least privileged environment, by limiting the permissions, you're reducing the attack surface. And, given the amount of data breaches we've had, I mean, even Verizon with its 2020 cyber breach data break investigations report, speaking about this, what is CyberArk doing in this space for its customers and for those who come to you asking for your help?
Yeah, that's right, Alex. So we recently released a cloud service, and what this cloud service does is it enables organizations to confidently embark on the digital transformation, but also retrospectively or determine what their least privileged profile will be.
Mm-hmm.
And it does this by continuously scanning the environment. It identifies candidates that have potentially been given too much permission, and it stack ranks these identities to say, hey, this identity score is quite high for this identity. And it can provide you with advice and guidance on how to mitigate it. And finally, how we do that is we use artificial intelligence to determine the past behavior and create a policy according to best practice that will implement this least privilege model.
And is it by using this particular service of CyberArk's that companies can ensure that their permission creep isn't happening, or that someone's given out too many permissions by accident or on purpose, even if it's some sort of internal attack, and so that this problem doesn't sort of re-emerge down the track?
Yeah, so it's a common scenario, isn't it? Like, you create identities, but organizations never stay the same. So permission landscape is huge, and it's becoming bigger as well. So the key is that continuous insight piece that you mentioned. So we need to be able to, in an automated fashion, determine those changes in permissions and really determine if that change is acceptable or not. And we need to apply kind of real-time policies to user needs, not wants, which are based on past trends and risks. And finally, the most important piece is we need to take action if we see a deviation from that, or if for some reason identity has been given too much permissions to do something.
Mm-hmm. So back to the SolarWinds breach, would that have helped organizations having least privilege if this sort of system was set up?
I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to put a lot of caveats around that, depending on the phase of the exploit, etc. So the goal of least privilege is obviously to make the job harder for the attacker. Our labs team has a really interesting write-up where they've analyzed the whole attack, and I thought something that really caught my eye in the attack was that these threat actors were looking specifically for a CyberArk capability, and if it detected that capability, it would actually pause the next action. Now, this capability that it was looking for promoted least privilege on the endpoint.
Well, I mean, it's good to know that the bad guys are, taking CyberArk's on their radar, so I guess that's a good thing. But you must have companies coming to you now taking this whole thing a lot more seriously than they were taking it in 2019. I mean, 2020, we were just trying to figure out how to keep the lights on and stay in business. So no doubt you would have had a lot of companies contacting you then. But I mean, in 2021 now, the focus, especially after SolarWinds, the focus must be on super high alert.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good news there, Alex, is they're actually starting to. I guess cyber attacks like this, although they're bad, they really give us an opportunity to examine our own security posture. And what we found is happening more commonly is organizations bringing us into the fold to tabletop these exercises and ask these what-if questions. So something like SolarWinds, they're coming in and saying, hey, how would we have used CyberArk to prevent this same attack from occurring in our environment? Now, I think this is a positive outcome of something like this, in the fact that this information is freely available and we can actually examine our own security postures as well. Yeah,
it's like I remember in the old days when, before we had sort of automated cloud backup to Dropbox and cloud backup services, and we'd have the hard disk on the table, and the kids or the dog or something would knock the hard disk off, it'd fall to the floor. Or when you went to back something up, you realized that it wasn't backing up for the last 6 months, and after you lost everything, everyone's become an expert on backup. Well, it's the same thing. Once you see your competitors or even yourself getting hacked, suddenly you want to become an expert on this so it doesn't happen to you again. And it's long awaited, but it's finally happening, which is a good thing.
Exactly, but that's why I think it's important that security is a team game. I think we achieve better success when we work together rather than throwing stones at people in these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we get towards the end of the interview, I always have 3 questions that I like to finish on. One is simply about the future. What are the sort of things that individuals and companies might be protecting in 2030 or even just over the next 2 or 3 years? I mean, I like to, my sci-fi brain runs wild with people hacking into, brain chips that might be common by then, and, ransomware ransomware in your brain, so you end up in some sort of a malware-driven coma, which would be a kind of almost dystopian. But putting my crazy sci-fi fantasies aside, how do you think the next decade in cybersecurity will evolve?
Yeah, look, to me, I think it's going to be about the risk of the malicious insider. If anything, the pandemic has shown us the stress that this can cause on families and employees. And we're even seeing now cyber criminals selling credentials on the dark web as well. So I think, to me, the future is a maturing of this AI-based technologies to automatically secure identities. But more importantly, we want to quickly and easily predict malicious or suspicious activities and prevent it from occurring before it takes place. And I guess one of my favorite movies is Minority Report. And I like to think of the future of cybersecurity, something like that, where we can predict the outcome of something before it happens and take action before.
And so my second last question is simply to ask if you could please share some of the best advice you've received in life to help you get where you are today.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of my mentors through my professional career has always quoted Henry Ford. I don't know why, but it seems a bit unusual. But coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. And I think this is something I've always followed through my career, because I really do believe security is a team game, and we really need to work together to secure our organizations.
Yeah. Well, as they say, no man, and of course these days we'd say no woman is an island, and we work better together. Even with in the US, we see a lot of talk about unity and coming together and putting differences aside. Together we're stronger, and definitely with security that's the case. So my final question is, what is your final message to IT Wire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
Yeah, sure. If I had to leave with one message, it would be that identity security is becoming the new critical layer of security. And that old moat and castle analogy of securing enterprises has to make way for something more modern, like a zero trust approach and mindset. And really now we're seeing identity as being that new battleground.
Well, there's no question that security is, I don't think anyone is ignoring security anymore. The last 50 years where it was a secondary consideration, and if we haven't woken up in 2021, the companies that haven't are going to go out of business. And it's just something that is so crucially important. We all live our lives digitally. We even have the threat this week, as we're recording this, of Google saying that we're going to take away Google search from Australia if the government is trying to offer, trying to get it to force it to pay for news. And with our reliance upon Google and Gmail and Google Assistant and Google Home and all those sorts of things, even though there are lots of alternatives, trying to wean us off technology now is just impossible. So look, I really thank you very much for your time. I hope we can speak again in the future. Hopefully it's not because of some other hack attack, but because of some research or some positive things that have happened that CyberArk has been able to do. But I thank you for your time, and best of luck for 2021 and beyond.
Thank you. My pleasure, Alex. Great to chat with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you, mate.